It's time for the American oligarchy to end. Now, you might think that I'm being hyperbolic by calling it an oligarchy, but an oligarchy is just a small group of people who have control of a country, an organization, or an institution. And as I will show in this video, that is exactly the state that this country is in right now, with a group of politicians and a group of wealthy elite individuals who scratch each other's back to, number one, enrich each other, and number two, make sure they stay in power. And no, this is not an issue of inequality. No, this is not an issue of unfairness. And no, this is not an issue of even just morality. If you stick around to the end, I will show you why this is actually a matter of war, a matter of life and death. Stick around because this one is a wild ride. Ready? Let's dive in. Real quick, time is running out. I've got 2 more days left on my pre-sale for my portfolio allocation mastery class, teaching you how to bulletproof your portfolio. 60% off. It'll never be this price again. Get the discount code in the description below. There are 2 different types of inequality. There is inequality where somebody has skin in the game, and there is inequality from somebody who is a bureaucrat. I'm going to point out a couple excerpts from Nassim Taleb's book, Skin in the Game, and keep in mind this was written before 2020 when I think something in his brain just snapped. Nassim Taleb points out that there are 2 different types of inequality. One, people to tolerate. They become a fan of famous singers like Bob Dylan or very brilliant people like Socrates. They imitate them and are a fan of them. They don't resent them. The second inequality is from a person who seems to be just like you, but they are playing the system. And because of that, they get extremely rich. They're bankers, bureaucrats, senators shilling for the evil firm Monsanto. The way I like to visualize this is you have 2 people who start a job together. They've got the same level of education, they're the same age, they've got the same experience, and they both start out in this job in the exact same position. Person A, let's call him Bill, decides to do nothing but the bare minimum. Takes all his vacation days, takes all of his sick time, shows up on time, leaves as soon as his shift ends, and does nothing extra. Person number 2, let's call him John, decides that he's going to show up early, stay late, never take a day off, do projects in addition to his main job, main responsibilities, go above and beyond, do everything extra. Now, in scenario A, if John gets the promotion first, nobody's going to be upset. Literally everybody with a rational brain would look at that and say, yes, there deserves to be some inequality in pay here because he's doing more, therefore he should get more. That inequality would be good. But let's say there's a second scenario where you find out that Bill's dad is the CEO of the company, and therefore Bill gets the promotion first, even though he did not deserve it. This is inequality, and this is the inequality that people rightfully despise. Now, it's important to recognize that around the world, situations like that are sometimes a lot more common than they are in other places. For instance, in America, about 10% of Americans will spend at least a year in the top 1%. Further, if you look at the wealthiest 500 American people, only 10% of them were so 30 years ago. Compared to French, it was 60%, and a third of the richest Europeans were also the richest centuries ago. This shows that in America, at least right now, or at least a few years ago, compared to places in Europe, it's a lot easier to work your way up the ladder because there is mobility in income and wealth. You have a high chance of moving up compared to other places in the world. You also have a high chance of moving down. You've got risk of losing it all. Now, this is important to recognize, but it is also important to recognize that things are changing and not in the right direction. America is supposed to be the land of the free and the home of the brave, yet when we look at an index that classifies countries by their rankings of economic freedom, we don't even see the United States in the top 10. In fact, it doesn't even land in the top 20. The United States has been moving down on this list for years and is now at the rank of 25. And this isn't a recent change. We have seen approximately since 1970, coincidentally, that the income levels of the top 1% versus the bottom 90% have been moving in the wrong direction. If we take a look at this chart from WTF happened in 1971, we can see that the bottom 90% of earners, their wages, their earnings, their income has stagnated, while the top 1% has now surpassed it. Now that chart showed the overall trend, but it becomes even more apparent when we look at individual examples. People like Timothy Geithner, Bill Clinton, Tony Blair, regulators making rules and laws as complex as possible so that they have expertise that can be hired at a high price when they're out of office, or when they can make hundreds of millions of dollars in speaking fees. And an even more recent example of this comes down to the recent CIA director, Gina Haspel, who just joined the board of arms manufacturer BAE Systems. Shockingly, just in time for BAE to become the chief supplier of artillery to Ukraine. But it gets even worse than that. If we take a look at this list, you can see the net worth of everybody in Congress. And when you start to see Congress people with net worths of tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, again, these people, many of them have done nothing but worked in public service for their entire careers, you know something is wrong. And as Nassim Taleb points out in his book, having rich people in public office is very different from having public people become rich. It's the sequence that matters. Now, how do these people get so wealthy, you might ask? Well, it's not because they're geniuses or they've invented things or they are out there providing massive value to the world, creating large companies that many people want to work for and many people want to buy things from. Far from it. They're creating laws and regulations, and here's the key: they are investing accordingly. And there have been entire services and platforms now dedicated to going and finding all of the trades that Congress people are making so that they can follow along because they are outperforming the stock market consistently and significantly. Here's a recent tweet by QuiverQuant, who has identified the key areas, sectors, and industries that Congress members on both sides of the aisle have reported hundreds of trades in this year. Now, you might be thinking, well, surely this has to be illegal, right? And no, unfortunately it's not. There was a law passed called the Stock Act that was neutered just a year later, and even the slight rules involved in that have been found to have been violated by up to 66 members of Congress with insider trading. Now, last year, Nancy Pelosi was asked about this, and she was asked if they should consider any ban on Congress people trading individual stocks. Here was her response.
Because this is a free market and people, we are a free market economy. They should be able to participate in that.
Rules for thee, but not for me. Just a few weeks ago, she was asked further specifically about the trades that her husband has been making because he's been one of the most successful ones out there in outperforming the stock market, trading on things that just magically happened to pass through Congress at some point later on. So she was asked, has your husband ever traded on inside information that has been provided to him by you? And here was her response.
Over the course of your career, has your husband ever made a stock purchase or sale based on information you received from you?
No, absolutely not.
Extremely convincing, wasn't it? So like I said earlier, this is not just unfair, though it is. If they should be allowed to insider trade, then it should be wide open for anybody. They should be the last ones on the planet that are legally allowed to trade on insider information. And it's not just about inequality, because there's a difference in inequality. There's some inequality that's born out of merit and born out of providing a service or value to society and being rewarded as a result, getting rich from that. Nobody's going to resent you for that. But there's a big difference between that, getting into a position of power, changing the rules rules to make life and business harder for everybody else and making riches off of the ones that you privileged and you supported by your position of power. Big difference there, and it needs to stop. But it's not even about just that. Like I said in the beginning, it's actually coming down to a matter of life and death. So where am I going with this? Take a look at this recent report. Just days ago, the United States Congress passed a long-awaited bill to boost chip makers in the US in order to compete with China. The bill provides a stimmy check or a welfare check or a giant handout of $52 billion in your money for US production of semiconductors. It also includes a tax credit for chip plants estimated to be worth about $24 billion. And finally, it would authorize $200 billion over 10 years to boost scientific research to better compete with China. Now, coincidentally, right around the same time, some new reports of trading of chip makers came out from none other than Paul Pelosi. Now, it shows that he sold a trove of shares for a loss of $300,000. However, he could still own as much as $6.5 million. This is because the ranges of dollar amounts of shares in companies that congresspeople are required to report are so big that they're basically meaningless. Now, at first glance, this might seem a little bit odd because he's known about this legislation for months now, and that is true. And he has been accumulating shares of chip makers for this entire time since the bill was first introduced. Likely what this is, and I can't confirm this because we don't have transparency into these trades and these portfolios, but likely what is going on here is something called tax loss harvesting. If you know that an individual sector is going to perform pretty well over the future, but you have positions that are currently at a loss, one thing you can do is sell one of your positions to take that loss for tax purposes and reinvest those proceeds into another stock in the exact same sector. And just last month, as this bill moved towards a vote, Pelosi bought between 1 and 5 million of Nvidia shares. This means that you can still have exposure to the upside of the other companies while taking the benefit of the tax deductions you get from the losses of the one specific company you sold. Now, hang with me here because it's about to get evil. Another report within the last few days to come out is that the United States is expanding its China chip ban. Restrictions on China's access to chip making gear is tightening as Washington bans the sale of most gear that can fabricate chips of 10 and 14 nanometers. So follow the chain with me here and then we'll put the nail in the coffin. Pelosi and many others start stockpiling American chip makers. Finally, the bill gets pushed through Congress. Right around that same time, a ban comes out on Chinese chip makers. Now, we know about supply and demand, where if the supply of something goes down and demand stays the same, the price is gonna go up. And so if we can't get as many chips from China as we used to, and we can only get them from American sources, those American companies should do pretty well. And here's the nail in the coffin. The last couple of weeks, we have seen a major flip-flopping back and forth from our government about whether we would support Taiwanese independence, protect it from a Chinese invasion and full takeover, or whether we are fully on China's side supporting reunification, the one China policy. Recently, over the last few months, Biden was asked flat out whether he would support militarily Taiwanese independence. He said yes, and then the White House had to walk that statement back. Over the last few days, Nancy Pelosi's travel plans, which included originally a stop in Taiwan, were then canceled. She was going to try and sneak in, and now when the Chinese found out about it, now she's saying she's going to go there officially, and China actually came right out and said there would be grave consequences, and that whoever plays with fire will get burnt. Because of this, they've been ramping up military presence in the area, and with the recent ban on chips from China, and with the recent investments and laws devoted to boosting chip production and the profitability of chip maker companies in the States, I can only look at this with suspicion and wonder what the heck is going on. Because this isn't just about money anymore. This is real lives at stake, really threatening war. But I guess that's why they call it the military-industrial complex. It's not like we haven't seen anything like this before. In fact, this is the game plan we've seen for decades, and it's time for it to come to a stop. Now, there's very little that people like you and I can do about this, but you can call your congressperson. Just kidding, I would never recommend that, as if it would do anything. But there is a bill that has just been proposed that would ban members of Congress, senior aides, and spouses from holding and trading individual stocks. They would only be able to choose from a blind trust. And I guess that's as good of a place to start as any. At the end of the day, public sentiment really is the only thing that people in power care about, because if push comes to shove, they've got to keep their power. That's the only thing that they care about. And so the more people who know about this, the more people who are aware about these problems, the higher likelihood we have of succeeding at making this stop. So if you like this video, feel free to hit a like button and send it off to somebody you think would enjoy it as well. As always, I really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.